Hey everybody, I'm Bill Bengston, president of the SSE. Thanks for coming and watching this in this very weird COVID-based year. Normally, obviously, we would have our annual meetings and we'd have all sorts of good talks and I'd give a presidential address and all that, but I guess it's just COVID happens. So instead, you're sitting in my study and I'm talking to a camera and we'll make the best of it. We got no plan B. Anyway, the general idea behind my very short talk will be first a self-serving overview of the SSE for just a couple of minutes, talk about some society benefits and how and why we got started and all that. And then my presidential address, so to speak, which in turn will be short. My editorial, more than anything else, will be that those of us who look into scientific anomalies have spent, in my opinion, too much time letting the critics decide what the agenda is. And I think it's time now to tell the critics, go away, or come up with something that's really interesting or something that's particularly relevant. But we don't need to define ourselves by how others see us. It's time to move on. And I'll give you a couple of examples from my healing research. And then we'll look at some implications and applications. This will be a low-tech talk. So I'm not going to have PowerPoint after PowerPoint after PowerPoint. Actually, I'm going to show you only 3 slides in a couple of minutes. And then the rest of the time, as much as we can, we'll hang out, we'll talk, we'll see what happens. So let's start out by looking at where the SSE came from and how we got to where we are. The SSE mythology is that Bob John, who at the time was the Dean of Engineering and Applied Science at Princeton University, was on sabbatical at Stanford, and he gave a talk on consciousness and the possibility of studying various consciousness-related phenomena that were outside of the mainstream. And one of the people in the audience was Peter Sturrock. And Peter was very much impressed by Bob's talk. Bob, of course, was an impressive speaker. They started talking, and Peter from Stanford and Bob from Princeton said, why don't we try to figure out how we can do some real serious work in these various areas? And so a friendship was born. Peter, of course, ended up being the first president of the SSE. Bob John, I think, was the longest serving officer, and he was vice president for a whole bunch of years. But in any event, I think it was in 1981 that Bob and Peter got a number of scholars together to start a founding committee, which started to grow and grow and grow. And apparently there was a pretty much of a call out there, an unmet need, if you will, for scientists to have a slightly different a place to get together, share ideas and such. So Peter and Bob, Peter from Stanford, Bob from Princeton, got together with George Abell at UCLA and Tom Gold at Cornell and Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia, Marcello Truzzi from Eastern Michigan, and apparently this, which precedes my time, grew to be more than 100 people who got together to try to start this new scientific society. Virtually all the founders, and I have met some, but not all, virtually all the founders had academic appointments at many times very prestigious universities. And they basically, the thing that drew them together was they recognized the difficulty of conducting scientific work in unorthodox areas. And so the first meeting of the council was at the National Academy of Sciences in January 1982, and the first meeting of the Society for Scientific Exploration was at the University of Maryland in June of 1982. I came along, my first meeting was in 1999, and I had never heard of the SSE. I went to this meeting, a friend dragged me and said, come and talk a little bit about some of your healing research. I said, who are these people? And then I got to the meeting and I went, oh my God, who are these people? This was different. The SSE is a little bit different. And so now, fast forwarding, we have membership in 27 countries. We hold annual meetings in the US, unless we're being COVIDed. We hold biannual meetings in Europe, unless we're COVIDed. We have memberships which are available for active researchers and academics. We have memberships for the general public. We have student memberships. And of course, we have, in addition to these meetings where everybody tries to come together, we have our flagship academic journal, the Journal of Scientific Exploration. And we also publish Edge Science for the general public. So we got a lot of stuff. And as far as I'm aware, the SSE is the first scientific society devoted to the rigorous study of scientific anomalies. There have been certainly general interest areas, but we're talking about trying to start an academic society, or at least it came out of academia, where you're looking at systematic data, you're doing formal studies, and you're trying to get to the bottom of what all these anomalies might be about. And the second thing about the SSE, which is kind of unique, is that we're a generalist society. And what that means simply is that we put all the scientific anomalies under one tent. So there's, within the tent, if you're looking at unorthodox areas like parapsychology, it fits. Come on, join us if you're a parapsychologist. If, like me, you do research in alternative healing, it fits. If you're doing consciousness studies of various stripes, it fits. If you're doing remote viewing, if you're doing studies on mediumship, if you're studying reincarnation, let's go to the physical sciences, if you're studying zero-point energy, if you're studying subtle energies, if you're studying, you get the idea. And we all come together. Now, this has a particular advantage. You're studying healing, and your main area of interest is in healing, but sitting and listening and meeting to all the research that's going on in these other anomalies helps us to make connections so that we're not closeted in and we're not in our own little silo. So too many people sit in their little silo, and the silo can be, I'm studying unorthodox things and I want to be left alone. It's not orthodox versus unorthodox. In unorthodox, there's also the subtle energy crowd, zero-point energy crowd, remote viewing crowd, parapsychological crowd, et cetera, et cetera. How about we who are looking at these various anomalies, the things that don't make sense according to our current understanding of the way the world works? Can we get together and can we see what ties them together? So yeah, your main interest might be in healing, but sit down and listen to the studies on remote viewing and see what clicks in your head. And it turns out a lot of stuff clicks. So we're a generalist society. We're not focused on mediumship, but we do studies in mediums. So the founders, way back when, experienced antagonism from institutional resistance. If you're at Princeton and you want to start doing something unorthodox, well, you better have the stature of someone like Bob John, or you're not going to get away with it. You certainly don't want to get into this stuff if you're a first tier assistant professor recently out of grad school. This can kill your career. And so the founders said, you know, we got to pull back on this institutional resistance and make this a little bit more inclusive. And let's talk about academic freedom, and let's talk about what we really can do. There's still, to this day, so we're talking 40 years later, to this day, there is still official resistance in many departments, in many universities. You're going to find people who say, you know, you're talking about, why don't you do something that's real? That's still there. That's still within academia. I think it's lessening. The interesting observation I have is that even if there's institutional resistance, there's still a boatload of folks in those departments and universities who are interested in this stuff. They're interested, but they kind of peek out and they don't know where to go, and they don't know how to find colleagues, and they don't know how to make connections. They don't know how to network. The SSE is a beautiful place to network in all sorts of unorthodox areas. And I think this may be generationally changing. My experience is younger folks are much more open to these things than older folks. and folks who have had to struggle through conservative departments get jaded a little bit, and they're afraid to come out, as it were. But more and more of them are coming out, joining us, and looking around. So again, we're in 27 countries. We're in worldwide connections. It's a reasonably interesting society. So let me transition to a couple of comments I want to make, calling it a presidential address. I'd rather be speaking to you live. If we look at the data on the various anomalies that SSE folks look at, they're overwhelming. I mean, let's come on. You know, you can talk about remote viewing, and the number of studies that members and non-members have done on remote viewing is pretty startling. And there's going to be a whole bunch of critics out there who are going to say, well, remote viewing is nonsense. I mean, come on. You can't see things at a great distance. It violates all our principles. Or go to healing. You know, I study healing and I study it in labs. You know, so I get cancerous mice and I treat them. I'll show you a couple of ugly pictures in a little bit. But I get cancerous mice and I treat them, and the mice get better. Well, come on, that can't be. It's not possible. I don't need the critic. I don't need to look at the data, because the question of the claim is ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. It's actually what an anomaly means. It doesn't make sense based on our current understanding of the way the world works. So the anomalies don't make sense based on our understanding of the way the world works. But critics have said, since it's impossible, we don't need to look at the data. And like 4 or 5 seconds of reflection, and you see the absurdity of that kind of a statement. I mean, it's just dumb. Yet at the same time, is my observation, we've spent too much time responding to dumb people. Why should we respond to dumb people? They're dumb. So I've watched, for example, and no names here, just a general theme. I've watched, for example, parapsychologists rehashing, in the face of criticism, studies which could really be traced back to J.B. Rhine in the 1930s. Now, it's a whole bunch of years later. J.B. Rhine did this. He had pluses, he had minuses. At the time, you know, he had pretty much state-of-the-art studies, but they can be supplanted with more refined studies and all that. No argument there. But the phenomenon, for crying out loud, it's been established. You don't ask someone, you ought not to ask someone, do you believe in such a thing as, let's keep it loose, psi? Why? I mean, why do I have to believe in it? I mean, there is psi. I'm sorry, there is. Do you believe in healing? No, I don't believe in healing. I have data on healing. Belief isn't scientific. And belief comes in various flavors. There are people who believe every claim is true, and there are people who believe every claim is false. Now, from my point of view, they're roughly the same. They vary only in direction, but there's no cautious thinking. There's no systematic thinking. There's no rigorous thinking. There's no skeptical thinking. And my observation is there's very few skeptical scientists. A skepticism is rare, I think. More people believe. So I believe in remote viewing. I don't believe in remote. I mean, you know, again, it's a little silly. Are the data there? And the answer is yes, yes. So skepticism, and it's hard to find a good skeptic, skepticism, I think, is pretty rare out there, particularly when you deal with unorthodox phenomena. I've gone, for example, I've been invited to speak at skeptic societies, and I walk into a room, you know, that's the such and such skeptic society, and everybody's sitting like this, and they're all in a pretzel. And I walk in, I usually start by insulting them, which is my superpower. And I start by insulting them and I say, you know, I'm the only skeptic in the room. And, you know, then they get all more bent out of shit. No, we're the such and such skeptic society. I say, you're not really skeptics. You're mindless believers. No, we're skeptics. You're believers. You believe that everything I haven't yet said is wrong. And you don't even know what it is I'm going to say. But since I'm coming and I'm saying I'm studying healing, and we all know healing's impossible, we already know you're wrong. That's not a skeptic. That's a believer. And the interesting thing is this. When you finish a talk to a skeptic society, they don't know what to do, particularly if it's data-based. And they're looking around, they're not sure how to react, and they're trying to, of course, maintain their order in the pecking order of the skeptic society. So they'll try to wait till everybody leaves the auditorium, and then they'll come up to me and go, that was great. And then they'll run away. And I go, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay to be skeptical. Be a skeptic. Everybody here's not a skeptic, they're believers. Anyway, I am recommending that we not be defined by our critics. I'm recommending that we are defined by the quality of our data. And then hopefully we're defined not only by the quality of our data, we're defined by the quality of our models, which help explain the data and lead us to a new understanding of the way the world works. So what I call first order questions are, is the stuff real? Is remote viewing real? Is healing real? Is this real? Is that real? And by real, again, I don't mean belief. I mean, are there data that can overwhelm and be extremely convincing? And it's time to, you got critics in the beginning, and I think that's appropriate, but once the data, at the Pear Lab at Princeton, they had almost 30 years of control studies on remote viewing and whether or not, the question of whether or not consciousness can affect a random number generator. It can. I mean, the 31st year wouldn't have changed anything. It's enough already. It's time to focus on second order questions. Not is it real, but rather what are the conditions and what are some of the correlates? And then ultimately, of course, the motherlode question is, how does this stuff work? But not, is the stuff real? So I'm going to give you a quick down and dirty example from some of my healing research. I have, many of you know this, I have 18 mouse experiments at this point, healing cancer in mice. I've done these at 6 different medical schools, 3 additional biology labs. I have innumerable in vitro experiments on cells. And the first order question is healing real? I mean, it's a stupid question to me at this point. This is not to say that all claims are real. It's not to say that everybody who says this or that about healing is real or accurate or anything like that. But the phenomenon that there is such a thing as anomalous healing is no longer an interesting question. What's interesting is the second order questions. Who can do it? How can it be done? You know, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to try and not screw this up here, but I'm going to try to put up 3 slides, nice and simple. I'm hoping this works. Let's try this. Now I'm hoping that you all can see a picture of an ugly looking mouse here. So what I do in my studies is very simple. I take something that's already widely known, something that's already widely understood, something that's conventionally recognized. This is what you're looking at is a mouse with cancer. And it's got a big tumor and it's ugly and all that kind of stuff. And this particular mouse and this particular mouse model is very, very well understood. And there's 2,000 publications on it and all of that. And what I do in my simple way of thinking is I add a single variable. So I add the variable. This is a picture of me at a recent study we did at Brown University at the medical school there. And I dress funny and I wear masks, and this is before COVID. And I do all those kinds of things. And then I try a healing technique that I made up on cancerous mice, like you just saw. And what happens is reasonably interesting. The mice, instead of dying, get an anomalous ulceration, and that grows to ugly size. The ugly size ulceration then implodes, and the mice are cured. cured. So that's reasonably interesting. So let me see if I can now stop sharing and go back here and see if I am doing this right. Probably not. Okay, so I'm hoping I'm back and that you're seeing me. So some second order questions. Not is there healing? I mean, I just showed you 3 quick slides. Yes, there's healing. Does distance matter? See, I'm not asking whether there's healing. Does distance matter? Does dose matter? Does the number of mice in an experiment matter? Does healing progress in a linear fashion? Is there a connection between a healer and a healee? Does healing change anything in the physical space? Does the mindset of the healer matter? Can healing be stored? These are second order questions. And I can answer most of these, so why not? I'm here. Does distance matter? No. I can defend that in an entire talk, but does distance matter? No. Whether the mice are here or the mice are 1,000 miles away doesn't matter at all. Is there a dose response? Yes. Something real, something modelable is occurring in healing, and there is a dose response. It's a complex problem, but at this point, I'm reasonably confident that there's a dose response. Does the number of mice in an experiment matter? Yes. And here's an interesting phenomenon. The more mice in an experiment, the faster they collectively cure. Try to make sense out of that. Is healing linear? No. It goes in sudden phase transition shifts. That's interesting. Are there measurable connections between healer and healee? Yes. I got a boatload of studies on EEGs and functional MRIs and all that, and I can show connections at vast distances between healer and healee. Is there any measurable change in the physical space? Yes. We can go in the lineage of Bill Tiller, changes in physical space. There's changes in physical space which occur in healing. We can see it as an reduction in entropy. Random number generators in the room where healing is happening don't produce random numbers. It's as if there's an insertion of information into a system. Does belief matter? Probably hurts, probably hurts. Disbelievers, non-believers, skeptics, I think, do the best job at healing, and skeptics are actually the best healees. In the case of mice, I don't think they're that skeptical. Is there a particular state of mind necessary in healing? No. Just get out of the way, let healing happen. Can it be stored? Yes, this is what I'm currently working on. Not going to discuss it today, but can we actually take healing, store it in a device, in a battery, in a recording, you see where I'm going with this, and thereby make it scalable. If we can make it scalable, we also have the possibility of making it conventional. So these are second order questions. You come to me and say, you think there's such a thing as healing? Get away from me. How can we store healing? Well, what do you got so far? I'll tell you what I got. Let's see what you got. Let's gather some data. So we got SSE members all over the place working on all sorts of stuff. Consciousness studies. I mean, if you just to study the output of the PAIR lab from Bob and Brenda, it's astonishing. Look at Roger Nelson keeping the ball going with the global consciousness. Look at Dean Radin's work on pretty much anything, quantum entanglement, et cetera, et cetera. 0-point energy studies by Garrett, Modell, and others. Mediumship studies. Here, do you believe in mediumship? Well, I don't know. Julie Bichel has a quintuple blinded study on mediumship. I mean, what do you want after a quintuple blind study? Physical mediumship. Steve Browdy. We got a whole group looking at technologies. So I'm building a technology of healing. We got Yuri Krohn, we got John McMichael, we got a whole bunch of folks working on various technologies, trying to scale this thing up. And so the bottom line, the take-home question, it's time to move from belief-based criticism. It's stupid. Second-order questions are much more interesting. I mean, ESP is real. Healing is real. Remote viewing is real. Doesn't mean every claim is real. Doesn't mean everybody can do it. Doesn't mean anything like that. It means there's something in there that we can sink our teeth into, and we can stop being defensive, for crying out loud. The central scientific question is, how does it work? And that, it's hard. It's hard. That's the benefit of coming under a big tent. You come under a big tent and you see all the stuff that people in the various anomalistic areas are working on. That's interesting. Can we get a glimmer, get out of your silo? Sure, I study healing, but what do I learn from the remote viewing people? What do I learn from you get the idea. Can we build a whole bunch of testable hypotheses? Yes, and if we test them, we don't ask for belief. Here's the tested hypothesis. Talk about my methodology. See where I screwed up. Did I screw up? If I haven't screwed up and the thing is repeatable, start to pay attention. Test it for yourself. And of course, the thing that's really interesting to the younger generation, how can we use this stuff? I gave a talk on some research at someplace out west, University of Washington, and we were talking to a bunch of people of various ages. And it was the older folks who were looking at this going, wow, look at this and this and that. Do you believe? Do you not believe? You know, they're waiting back at the beginning, and had a good discussion with some young folks. And the young folks said, well, of course this stuff is real. How do we use it? And how do we experience it? And so generationally, I think the thing that people are interested in is personal experience and just practicality. How do we use it? How do we use healing? How do we scale it? How do we use remote viewing? How do we use? If we look at the anomalies, there are some serious scientific implications. And some of them, you can see why it drives some folks crazy. And on the other hand, there's an incredible potential for opening up a world and opening up new worlds. So let's take a couple of them. If we look at the assumptions that scientists work under, experimentalists work under, one of the assumptions is locality. Physical separateness means independence. The data in anomalies strongly indicate non-locality, that these phenomena don't respect time, don't respect distance, and they don't respect time. If phenomena can be outside of distance and time, what are the implications for experimental design, and what are the implications for how the world works? The data can indicate experimenter effects. So if different people run the same experiment, independent observers, and they get different results, what does this mean? What are the implications for experimental design? What are the implications for our understanding of how the world may work? And it's pretty obvious if you start thinking about this stuff that the world doesn't work in the way the textbooks say that it works. So lots of opportunities for research, lots of opportunity for investigation. I think we have a public right for participation. I think more and more institutions are open to these kinds of things. But let's not just respond to critics. Let's lead the way. Let's not be defensive about all this stuff. So if you're watching this and you're interested in anomalies, come check us out. Check out the journal. Check out Ed Science. Check out a meeting. Hope we get to meet you someplace down the road.